The Strangest Lessons from Beckett, Life in Limbo. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you've ever done, everything you've built your identity on, success, progress, purpose, was all just a distraction from the terrifying stillness of being. That underneath your goals and achievements, there's a silent void that never stops whispering, "What now?" What if life is less about becoming someone and more about enduring, surviving, even waiting, without ever knowing what we're waiting for? This isn't nihilism, this isn't giving up, this is Samuel Beckett's world, and if you let it, it might just save you from the exhausting illusion that something is always supposed to happen next. Beckett didn't want to be a philosopher. He didn't even want to be understood. But paradoxically, in his refusal to explain, he revealed something most philosophers miss, that meaning is not always something to find. Sometimes meaning is something to wait through, and that's where we begin, with the waiting. In Beckett's most famous play, Waiting for Godot, two characters stand in a barren landscape, waiting for someone who never comes. They talk, they argue, they fantasize, they consider leaving, but they stay. Always they stay. Why? Because they said they would, because maybe tomorrow will be different, because they don't know what else to do. Sound familiar?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
You and I, we've stood in that same place, maybe not on a stage, maybe not under a tree, but in that mental space of limbo. We've waited for meaning to show itself, for the right job, for the right person, for purpose to suddenly appear like a divine email in our inbox. But here's the terrifying beauty of Beckett. He strips away your excuses. He shows you characters with no distractions, no smartphones, no deadlines, no productivity hacks, just the raw, naked experience of being here. And what do they do with it? They talk, they joke, they despair, but they stay, they endure. And that's not weakness. That's the deepest kind of strength. Why do we fear stillness? Why does doing nothing feel like failure? Beckett forces us to confront the idea that maybe life doesn't move in a straight line, maybe it loops, maybe it stalls, maybe it just is, and maybe that's okay. In a world obsessed with the next big thing, Beckett teaches us how to stand still without going mad. Or rather, he shows us that madness might not be the enemy. It might be the natural consequence of being awake in a world that offers no easy answers. There's a strange kind of hope in Beckett, not the Pinterest kind of hope, not the everything happens for a reason hope, but a deep, gritty, silent hope, the kind of hope that whispers, you can keep going even if you don't know why. He once wrote, "I can't go on, I'll go on." That line has saved lives, not because it solves anything, but because it names the paradox we all live with. We're tired, we're lost, but somehow we keep showing up, and that showing up, that enduring, is a kind of faith. Beckett doesn't give you a ladder to climb out of despair, he gives you a chair to sit in it. And in that sitting you discover something strange. The despair isn't endless. It's alive, it changes, it teaches, it humbles, it connects. When you stop running from meaninglessness, you realize it's not a void, it's a mirror. It shows you who you are when there's nothing left to perform. No audience, no ambition, just you and the moment and the silence. Have you ever sat in silence long enough to hear yourself think, and then kept sitting long enough to hear yourself stop thinking? That's the Beckett space, that's limbo, and it's not a curse, it's a training ground. In that space, you learn to let go of the need to be impressive, you learn to accept your confusion, you learn to make peace with boredom, and in that peace, something unexpected happens. You become real, not the version of you chasing validation, not the version of you with the perfect 5-year plan, just the you that is flawed, tired, aching, but still here. What if being lost means you're finally free? Most of us are terrified of admitting we don't know what we're doing. Beckett wants you to scream that truth from the mountaintops. We don't know what we're doing, we're waiting, we're scared, and we're still here. That's not a failure, that's the most honest thing we can say. And in that honesty we find each other, we find compassion, we find laughter. Because yes, Beckett is bleak, but he's also funny, absurd even. Tragedy and comedy live in the same breath. One moment you're crying at the futility of life, the next you're laughing at its ridiculousness. That's Beckett. That's life. So here's a question for you. If nothing ever changed again, if your life stayed exactly as it is, could you still find a reason to wake up tomorrow? That's not a pessimistic question. That's the challenge of Beckett. And your answer might surprise you. How failure becomes freedom. Beckett's ultimate rebellion against success. There's a paradox hiding in plain sight, and Beckett saw it clearer than almost anyone else. We are obsessed with succeeding, yet utterly haunted by the possibility that success might mean nothing. Think about it. How many of us have chased goals only to feel strangely empty when we achieve them? How many of us define ourselves by progress, yet feel deeply unsettled by the idea that progress might be an illusion? Beckett didn't just understand this anxiety, he built his entire vision of life around it, and then, astonishingly, he offered us a kind of escape, not by succeeding, but by embracing the strange, liberating power of failure. I tried, I failed. No matter, try again, fail better. You've probably heard that quote before. It's been printed on posters, used in motivational speeches, even quoted in tech startups. But what's wild is that most people completely miss what Beckett meant. This isn't about relentless hustle. It's not about failing your way to success. It's about something far more radical. Letting go of success entirely. Beckett isn't saying we should fail in order to eventually win. He's saying that failure is the point, because only in failure do we get free from the illusion that life owes us a payoff. That's the rebellion, that's the genius. In a world that demands outcomes, Beckett invites us into a space where outcomes dissolve, where effort matters more than achievement, where the very act of continuing becomes the victory. Imagine if you didn't have to be extraordinary. Imagine if the pressure to impress was lifted. What would you do? Not to win, not to be remembered, but just because it mattered to you in the moment. And what would your days look like if you stopped needing them to add up to something? Beckett's characters fail constantly. They forget things, they contradict themselves. They say they're leaving but stay. They make plans they know they'll never follow through on. And yet, they don't stop living, they just keep going. And in that going, something strange starts to happen. Their failures become a kind of authenticity, a kind of honesty. There's no pretending to be enlightened or successful or wise, just the raw, awkward, messy truth of being human, and that's something we can all relate to. Have you ever felt like you're pretending your way through life, like you're wearing a mask of competence just to keep everything from falling apart? Beckett would say, take off the mask, let it fall, because the moment you admit you don't have it all figured out, you stop being a role and you start being a person. And being a person, really being one, is harder, but infinitely more beautiful. Failure then is not the enemy, it's the doorway, the place where the performance drops away and something real can begin. Not a new success story, not a phoenix rising from the ashes, but a human standing in the ruins saying, I'm still here. That, Beckett believed, is enough. What if your worth didn't depend on your productivity? In Beckett's world, every attempt is sacred, even the doomed ones, because trying, even when you know you'll fail, is the most human thing you can do. And do you know what happens when you stop fearing failure? You start living. Not strategically, not efficiently, but truthfully. You start writing the book you've always wanted to write, not because it'll be a bestseller, but because something inside you needs to say those words. You start reaching out to people not to network, but to connect. You start trying strange things, making odd art, having real conversations, because you're no longer trapped by the myth that everything must lead somewhere. Beckett teaches us that life doesn't have to lead anywhere to be meaningful, it just is. And in that isness, we find freedom, the freedom to fail, and in failing, to finally be ourselves. The Theatre of Absurdity, why life's weirdness is the truth you've been avoiding. Life is weird, let's just admit it. Not in the quirky Instagram aesthetic kind of weird, but in the deep, disorienting, what the hell does any of this mean kind of way. We live in bodies we didn't choose, in a world we didn't create, with minds that constantly contradict themselves. We follow routines, make small talk, chase dreams, and yet, every now and then, we're hit with the sudden realization that none of it quite adds up, that somewhere beneath the surface of our roles and rituals, there's an absurdity we're too afraid to name. Samuel Beckett named it. He didn't just name it, he built entire worlds out of it. And in doing so, he gave us a blueprint for facing the absurd, not with fear, but with radical honesty. The theatre of the absurd isn't just a literary genre, it's a mirror, a way of saying, look at the world not as it should be, but as it is. In Beckett's plays, logic breaks down, time loops, language collapses into nonsense, characters forget their own names, repeat themselves endlessly, and often seem to be caught in some cosmic glitch. But here's the twist. None of that makes the plays meaningless. In fact, the more absurd they become, the more they start to feel like life itself. Because who among us hasn't had a day or a year where everything seemed pointless, where the rules stopped making sense, where it felt like we were just going through motions with no clear destination? What Beckett teaches us is that absurdity isn't something to escape from, it's something to see clearly. And once we see it, something incredible happens. We stop pretending. We stop needing the universe to make perfect sense. We stop insisting that life be fair or logical or even coherent. Instead, we start meeting life on its own terms. We start laughing at the contradictions. We start finding beauty in the broken grammar of our days. We start living with both eyes open. Have you ever felt like you were acting out a script but had no idea who wrote it? Beckett's characters are often trapped in roles they can't quite abandon. Tramps who wait, clowns who perform, old men who rehearse their own deaths. But the genius of Beckett is that he doesn't mock them, he honors them. He shows us that even within the absurd, there's dignity. Even in the most ridiculous situations, there's a kind of grace. Because to stand in the chaos and keep speaking, to keep moving, to keep trying to connect, that's not failure, that's courage. There's something profoundly human about continuing to live in a world that doesn't explain itself. And when we accept the absurd, not as a mistake, but as the texture of reality, we begin to live more honestly. We begin to forgive ourselves for not having the answers. We begin to feel less alone in our confusion, because suddenly it's not just your confusion, it's everyone's. It's built into the structure of existence. What if the strangeness you've been resisting is actually the most truthful part of your life? Beckett didn't want you to escape the absurd. He wanted you to look at it, laugh with it, and maybe even dance with it. Because once you stop demanding that life be normal, you start discovering how astonishingly alive it really is. Why endurance is enlightenment. Beckett's answer to the meaning of life. What if enlightenment isn't a flash of clarity, but a slow, quiet refusal to give up? Not a moment of cosmic revelation, but simply learning how to sit with the ache of being alive and still choosing to breathe, to notice, to remain. Beckett, more than almost any thinker of the last century, understood that the deepest truths often emerged not in moments of ecstasy, but in moments of exhaustion. When the illusions fall away, when the answers don't come, when all that's left is the next breath, the next step, the next pause in an endless routine. In that space, Beckett saw something sacred, something most of us miss because we're too busy running from it. There's a strange holiness in repetition. In Beckett's plays, characters do the same things over and over. Wait, talk, fall, get back up. There's no final victory, no triumphant ending, and yet somehow they endure. That's the miracle. In a culture obsessed with transcendence, Beckett brings us back to the ground, to the dirt, to bodies that hurt, to days that drag on. And he shows us that real meaning isn't found in escape, but in remaining, in not turning away, in facing the absurd, the silence, the stagnation, and still choosing to stay. That's not failure, that's wisdom. Have you ever considered that maybe the point isn't to rise above suffering, but to walk through it with your eyes open? We're trained to believe that life is about improvement, that we should always be evolving, leveling up, becoming better. But Beckett asks, better by whose standards? Toward what end? What if there is no finish line? What if the only thing that matters is how deeply we show up for the present? Especially when it's difficult, especially when it offers nothing in return. That's where endurance becomes something more than survival. It becomes presence. It becomes a kind of spiritual clarity that doesn't need explanations or rewards. Beckett once wrote, "The tears of the world are a constant quantity." He didn't mean this in despair. He meant that suffering is universal, and in its universality it connects us. We are not alone in our pain. We are not isolated in our weariness. We are part of a shared human condition, bound not by our victories, but by our perseverance, not by escaping the world, but by staying inside it, fully awake, fully human. What if staying, just staying, is the most radical act of all? In a world that screams at you to move faster, Beckett whispers, slow down, sit with the stillness, let time pass, let boredom arrive, let the silence stretch out until something unexpected stirs inside it, a kind of awareness you didn't know you were capable of, a kind of love for the very fact that you're still here, still breathing, still capable of noticing the absurdity and beauty of existence, all tangled up together. It turns out Beckett's answer to the meaning of life isn't flash, it's not poetic, it's not even satisfying in the traditional sense, but it's real. It's this: you go on. You don't know why. You don't need to. You endure, not because you expect a reward, but because endurance itself is a form of love, a form of truth, a form of being fully alive in a world that doesn't owe you anything, but still gives you this moment and then the next. And maybe, just maybe, that's all the meaning we'll ever need.